Welcome to the Her Roots panel. I'm Bethany Ray, and I'm going to welcome everyone up and introduce you as you come up. So come on up, Hilary, Diandra, Abby, and Annie, and I'll introduce you while you're taking your seat. So we have Hilary Black. She is the Director of Patient Education and Advocacy at Canopy Growth. Hilary is the founder of the British Columbia Compassion Club Society, the first medical cannabis dispensary in Canada. Hilary is an inspiration for many of us working in the cannabis industry. Diandra Phipps is a social entrepreneur focused on sharing values of health and wellness through business. She is the She's a co-founder of multiple businesses. And I'm just going to go. She's been with National Access Cannabis since 2016, first as patient educator and regional manager of their Atlantic Canadian clinics, and more recently has become the manager of corporate affairs.
Yeah, good call.
Abigail Sampson began her career as a volunteer with NORML Canada, the longest running cannabis advocacy group in Canada. Currently, she is one of only 2 women who sits on their board of directors. In September, she presented as an expert witness in the House of Commons regarding Bill C-45, the Cannabis Act. Abigail currently works as a client care representative at the Tweed Main Street shops. Annie MacEachern is freelance communications consultant and advocate for public education on the safe use and regulation of cannabis. Annie has been an active voice in her PEI community, organising information sessions to engage her community in conversations surrounding legalization. Annie actually designed this panel, so Annie, thank you for bringing us together. So I'm really excited to be part of this panel where we're focusing on women-led grassroots initiatives in the cannabis industry. I'm really excited about this because I think it's easy for women to talk themselves out of doing something that is big and might scare them. And I know this is true for me, and if it wasn't for the women before me that inspired me, or the women that have supported me in the industry, I might not have had the courage to do something that I saw that needed being done in the industry, which was what led me to start Flower and Freedom. So thank you to the women here today and the women before me in the cannabis industry. So today we're going to share some of the stories that we have from the years past and the women that inspire us today. We're going to chat about the initiatives that we're leading and why we feel so strongly about them. Our hope is that these conversations today might inspire some of you to find what it is that you're really passionate about in the cannabis industry and encourage you to reach out to each other to grow a strong and ethical industry together. So I have some questions for each of you and for all of us. So please feel free to jump in. We'll have this as a conversation. Oh, my beauty's big. So Hilary, I want to start with you because for a lot of us, you are a big inspiration in the industry. And I'd love to hear more about your work before the BC Compassion Club and who were the women that inspired you even before that time.
Can you guys hear us? It seems so loud in here. And yeah, it's good. You can hear. All right. I guess it's the country is going a bit crazy about cannabis, and the level of volume in here is closer. Is that better? Better? Okay. So yeah, it sounds really hectic from up here. So long time ago, like in 1994, dating myself, I graduated from high school and went on Grateful Dead tour. And I thankfully caught the very tail end of Jerry on tour. And it was on Grateful Dead tour that I learned this crazy thing about hemp. And that hemp could be fuel, and hemp could be fiber, and hemp could basically save the planet. And I came back to Vancouver, and Ian Hunter and Mark Emery had opened Hemp BC. Does anybody here know who Ian Hunter is? Yeah, we know who Ian Hunter is. So Ian Hunter, if you don't know who he is a really important part of our roots to go and look up. Ian's not with us anymore, and he was an integral part of getting the cannabis movement started in Canada. So Mark Emery and Ian Hunter had opened Hemp BC, and they had a woman managing that store called Dana Rozek. A huge shout out to Dana. Does anybody remember Hempology 101? Yeah, awesome! I totally was wondering if anybody would be here that goes back that far. So across the street from Hemp BC, Dana had a flat. And every Thursday night, we would gather and we would smoke pot and we would learn about the cannabis plant. And we would have different lessons and different teachers. And we learned all of the things that are kind of commonplace knowledge to us now. And that summer, and Dana was fearless. She is really the one who taught me about having kind of justice on your side and fighting like hell to free this plant, no matter what the costs were, and not being afraid of going to jail, and not being afraid of breaking laws that were wrong. And she gathered people in her home to celebrate the plant and to consume it. And in the summer of 1995 was the very first summer that we started smoking pot publicly in Hemp BC. And this was a really big deal, and you wouldn't think so, you know, when you look at like what is happening in our country now, and even like what's able to happen in this conference. But I remember clear as a bell the first day that 4 of us, and we were all pretty young women, lined up behind the counter, and we shouted, "420, spark 'em if you got 'em," and we threw out a few joints to people that were in the store, and pretty soon it turned into a crazy thing that summer where people were packing that hemp store like it was a rock concert because we were consuming cannabis publicly. We were starting to basically come out of the closet. And that is like the way back beginning roots of the movement that has become this industry.
Even back then, would you be talking about legalization and what that could look like?
You know what? We weren't so far as to thinking about shaping legalization. We were just trying to begin getting some momentum and some consciousness about the fact that this plant is incredibly beneficial and that it needed to not be classified with other harmful drugs.
The conversation. Yeah. So to Annie and to Abby and Diandra, you are all based out east. And what has been your experience or challenges with women coming together to discuss cannabis opportunities out east, especially in comparison to what you're happening out here? What has that been like for you out there?
Well, I'm from Prince Edward Island, the smallest province in Canada, so this would never happen. When I come to Vancouver, it feels like I'm coming to the future, honestly. Women and cannabis they're 2 words that you don't really hear together on the East Coast. But I've been really forging ahead. I have joined groups of women just to talk about cannabis. And I established myself as a credible member of my community. I worked really hard as a communications consultant. And then after I had kind of gotten everyone's respect, I said, hey, by the way, I consume cannabis every day. And that's why I'm the amazing person I am. So that's how I broke it down. And through that, I've had so many women reach out to me on Instagram. And that's really where I've been able to connect my femininity and cannabis through Instagram. So that's my platform that I love to talk about women and cannabis. So it's not directly on the East Coast, but that's kind of where I started.
It's funny because when I first met Annie, it was at the Lift conference in Toronto, and we had met at the restaurant. Maybe I'm from Halifax, so I'm from Nova Scotia, not too far from PEI. And Annie came up to me and she said, "You're Diandra," and I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "You own on V." Oh my God, I just wanted to connect with you. So she really made those connections happen, and I was really fortunate to have her come up to me and introduce herself because, you know, you go to Toronto or you go to Vancouver, you don't see a lot of people from the East Coast. So since then, we kind of forged a really great relationship. And, you know, from my experience in Nova Scotia, looking out to BC and some of the other cities, there's Women Grow chapters, and there's all of these different organizations that really support women in the cannabis industry. But in Halifax even, which is obviously much bigger than Charlottetown PEI, there still isn't even a big underground movement of women in cannabis, or just cannabis in general. So I work with National Access Cannabis, and you know, when we opened the location in Halifax, we didn't really know what to expect, but starting to have that conversation and breaking down the stigma and normalizing cannabis. It's been really interesting to see the type of people that are coming in to learn more, and it's actually slightly more women and women over 40. So the conversations that we're having are really interesting, and it's definitely building in the East Coast a lot more. It's just not in your face like it is here. So a lot of people just don't know that it exists. So.
Well, I'm actually out in Toronto, so very similar to out here in Vancouver. We do have a robust and thriving and so incredibly diverse cannabis community out there. I mean, we've got vapor lounges, we have ganja yoga, we do infused cannabis dinner parties, really exclusive foodie events. We've got dispensaries. Many of the licensed producers are in Ontario as well. So I've been really lucky to find my network of incredible weed women who have been able to take me under their wing and really show me the kind and compassionate side of cannabis. So I'm incredibly lucky. I mean, I started out as a member of the steering committee at the inaugural chapter of the Women Grow Toronto. And, there we actually, our mandate is to inspire and empower and educate women to enter the cannabis space. And at the same time, I also started attending Ladies Love Mary Jane sessions, which is a monthly event where women get together. It's a women-only event. We pass around the peace pipe, and we celebrate our individual stories in a non-judgmental space. So even though each event, took place once a month, the purposes were really different. Women Grow was more for business and networking, and Ladies Love Mary Jane was more of a social gathering, right? But after each event, I felt so empowered and so well supported, and I left with a fire in my belly, to do something incredible in this industry. So Toronto, women are really killing it in the cannabis industry, and I'm just so blessed to be a part of it. Really, I am.
That's great. Kind of a big one here. I'm going to jump right in. So cannabis has really empowered me in my own life to change parts of my life that I was unhappy with, and really help with me in my relationships and in my career. And does anyone else feel that cannabis legalization is almost part of a bigger conversation connected to women's rights movements and the way that we approach healthcare and these big changes that are happening in healthcare and mental health conversations and so many topics that I feel like cannabis is helping actually unearth and forcing them to the table for discussion. Because that's when I rediscovered cannabis in my early 30s, it forced me to become more self-aware of myself and everything around me, and there was no conversation that I could not have that I'd left before, and I feel like cannabis is part of that. Does anyone else feel that in the way that we approach cannabis?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to speak to the different mental health and mental health conversations, just because I feel like there might be other people on this panel who can speak more eloquently and more eloquently to that. But I truly believe that cannabis legalization is the absolute tip of the social justice iceberg. Right now in 2018, the federal government is committing to legalize cannabis. By keeping in mind that, cannabis is an opportunity cannabis legalization rather, is an opportunity to really recognize some of the harms that have been done because of the war on drugs. Prohibition continues to disproportionately target, people of color, youth, the poor, and other people in impoverished communities. And taking into account, currently, if you have a cannabis criminal conviction on your record, you can't actually participate in some of the highest levels in this industry. Truthfully, in my opinion, I feel as though that having an inclusive cannabis industry is really important. You know, allowing players from all walks of life to be able to participate. If you take into consideration what's going on in LA and Oakland, they've actually introduced something that's called the Equity Permit Program, where people who have had prior cannabis convictions on their record have actually been put in front of the line to apply for business permits. So, I mean, California is really recognizing the fact that, you know, there are reparations that need to be done because of the harms due to the drug wars, and they're really recognizing that there are already people in the cannabis space who are knowledgeable with the experience and who deserve a space to be in to be in the industry. So, absolutely. For sure.
Diandra, with your experience in your work in the patient care services, do you find that a woman patient that's coming in is more likely to connect with a female patient care officer? Do you find that in your line of work?
It's been interesting, you know, and I think to kind of segue from the last question, I really do believe cannabis has become a catalyst for conversation. Otherwise, you know, maybe someone otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable speaking about their mental health issues or things that are happening at home or how they're really not getting the benefits or seeing the results from conventional therapies or treatments. And definitely, I was in the patient care side of the business for the first 6 to 8 months with NAC, and it was incredible to be able to have these conversations with women that probably have never had the opportunity to really tell someone how they're feeling. And I can't even count how many times I've sat in front of a woman and she's very, very much opened up to me, to the point where we're both crying and going, oh my gosh, okay, how do we move forward from here? And the first step is talking about it. So I really do believe that it's interesting, and I don't know about other patient care centers, but we do have a very large female staff because I think females are just naturally, you know, they're compassionate and they're giving, and we have an opportunity to give our time and really make a difference in having that first conversation and getting it out there. And I think that's a big relief for a lot of women, is just to get it off their chest. You know, I have had this, you know, issue with anxiety or depression, and this is the way that it affected my life, and can cannabis help me? And a lot of people come to us having never used cannabis before, so it's been quite interesting.
Yeah, it sort of highlights the importance of women's roles in the cannabis industry, that new consumers are more likely to trust and talk to a female-led initiative. Yeah. So, Hilary, I'm going to come back to you about what that was like transitioning from your grassroots with the Compassion Club to the role that you're in with Canopy Growth today. So coming from that, you know, that grassroots initiative into the really large corporate side of cannabis. And what were your challenges, and what are the initiatives that you are making sure with your heart and your background are in the corporate side of cannabis today?
Okay, so there's a lot in there. I'm going to try to unpack that a little bit. I want to just say a little bit about the Compassion Club. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but it's not like any other cannabis organization in this country. It's a nonprofit. It's a Frontlines harm reduction organization. When I was in year 1, I think, of starting to distribute cannabis through the Compassion Club, this amazing witchy herbalist showed up and said, oh my God, I love your project. How about we take all of your money and we put it all towards giving away alternative health care to marginalized people in Vancouver? And I was like, that sounds like a great idea. So the Compassion Club is still operating in a civilly disobedient, nonprofit, frontlines harm reduction way today. It took about $500,000 a year to fund the wellness center that provides herbalists, nutritionists, counselors, doctors of traditional Chinese medicine, and we really are emergency net almost, catching people that are falling through the cracks. 20 years ago, Vancouver had a really serious hepatitis C and HIV epidemic. We were long before Insight. That amazing model has not been replicated across the country because there's no money in it. It's a real service organization. So in the early years of trying to get this up off the ground, it was crazy. Like, first of all, nobody would sell me any weed because they thought I was the biggest heat scorer in the universe. And Mark Richardson, aka Bubble Man, who has had my back for 20 years and continues to, would go out pot shopping for me because nobody wanted to come near me with a 10-foot pole. So even like supply was hard. The people who stepped forward to come and work with me at the Compassion Club were my girlfriends. We were in our young 20s. None of us had any training in dealing with the kind of complicated healthcare we were dealing with dealing with the mental health issues that we were dealing with. They were this like amazing, brave little wolf pack, and we were sure we were going to get busted every day. Every time a siren went by, we had like our escape plans for like packing up the weed in the kayak bag and out the back door, and like it was terrifying. And we had hundreds and hundreds and then thousands of dying people that were really poor and in terrible places in their lives, really counting on us. And there was a lot of men in the cannabis world, in my world, who told me that what we were trying to do was impossible, that we were trying to move a mountain that would never, ever be moved. There's no way that drug is ever going to be legal for medical purposes. And you know who thought it was possible and who believed in us like crazy is that amazing man right there, John Conroy. Right from the very beginning, John was like, Hilary, we can do this. And he helped me to strategize how to build the club in a way that when we started getting our ass dragged across the coals in court by some of those very fine prosecutors you've been up against, that we would have the right paperwork in place and we would have the right arguments in place. And that man spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours on the phone with me, helping me to create this organization in a way that it was going to be legitimate and trusted, and the police were going to accept it. And then he had to keep all of our suppliers out of jail as we went through the years. And so the success of the Compassion Club is it belongs to many people. Like, I birthed it, many people raised it, but that man is responsible for keeping it alive. So thank you, John.
That does deserve a round of applause.
So transitioning from that world into working with a licensed producer. So when the licensed producers first came on the scenes in Canada, we all hated them. And the idea that cannabis was going to get wrapped up in corporate control was like pretty hideous. And I made a decision to work with a licensed producer. At that time was called Bedrocan. It was being run by friends of mine who I'd known in the industry for a long time. I knew the Dutch guys. I really liked the company. And I decided that I wanted to try to touch more people across the country and not just kind of work in the little bubble. And I fell really hard from my activist pedestal. And the criticism was sometimes nasty. Special shout out to Breeder Steve, the only person who's ever been a real sexist misogynist publicly. No other people who worked in the dispensary world who transitioned into LPs got called out in social media in a way that was using sexual humiliation to try to tear me down. And that's one of the great things that sort of happens as a woman that doesn't happen to men. And the transition has been amazing. I work in Canopy Growth as a director of education and advocacy. I love my team. There's many amazing initiatives that I can come back to. You asked about what are the corporate social responsibility, but I want to let my lady friends, I don't want to hog the mic.
Yeah, one question, we can come back to it in a moment. I guess one thing I was going to throw out to everybody is what are you noticing about women's roles in grassroots initiatives versus on an executive level in corporate cannabis? Are you noticing that
well, I came from arts and culture. I worked as an executive director for the PEI Crafts Council. And in that role, I noticed that it was women that were the executive directors of arts and culture. They were really mobilizing their communities. They were finding all of the volunteers for any of the cultural activities. They were working 60 hours a week, being paid part-time, running entire organizations. And then as I moved into the cannabis industry, I started to see that it wasn't just in arts and culture that women were on the grassroots and they were fighting and they were mobilizing their communities, and they were doing the work that they don't get paid for. They were doing the work that they saw needed to be done, and they stepped in and they filled that gap. They didn't wait for a paycheck. They didn't wait for a job offer. And each one of these women filled the gaps in their communities. And that's kind of how I got to be so passionate about it. I'm a feminist, and I just believe that we are as worthy to be here and on this stage and part of this industry. And maybe it's our biggest downfall that we're so compassionate and that we don't need the dollars to do the good work. But I also think that it can be the biggest upside of being a woman, because compassion and cannabis go hand in hand.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Abigail, how have these grassroots initiatives inspired you in what you do now today at Tweed Main Street?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I try to channel as much of the knowledge and the energy that I have gained from other women in the grassroots cannabis movement in everything that I do at Tweed Main Street. For those who aren't familiar with what we do, the Tweed Main Street shops are resource hubs in your communities where people can actually go in and speak with someone face to face and get that support and education about cannabis. You know, there are a lot of people who are brand new to cannabis who might not feel super comfortable communicating with someone over the phone or online, so they can come into one of our centers and get that same hand-holding that they would get at a compassion center setting. And truthfully, I mean, that again, like, we really try to emulate that that warm and welcoming and comfortable and compassionate level of healthcare with every single person that comes in. Because I mean, as Hilary would attest to her days at the compassion clubs, like, you know, a lot of people who are coming in are at a really difficult place in their life, right? And cannabis is what they're turning to live better lives and to bring that quality of life back. With that being said, I mean, I have the absolute great fortune of having a true Canadian cannabis pioneer as my boss, Teresa Kozak. She is incredible. Right back from the old MMAR, MedCan Access days. For those who aren't familiar, MedCan Access was a medicinal cannabis dispensary who really had in their mandate a harm reduction and a harm reduction perspective, and they really treated every single person with so much dignity and so much respect. And that's really what I try to do in my work at Tweed Main Street. It's so important to recognize that long before this entire expo, compassion clubs were really the true roots of cannabis access, medicinal cannabis access in Canada. And to be able to continue to maintain that spirit in cannabis is so important, right? That's what you do at the centers at NEC, right, Diandra?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I have NAC, and it's very much it started as a patient educator, but I've moved into the corporate side of our business, and I'm one, other than our finance director, I'm the only female on our executive kind of corporate leadership team. So it's been very interesting over the past 6 months or so to transition into this role, and I have to say I'm very, very fortunate to have a really great team around me, and my CEO is incredible. And he's given me the same opportunities that anyone else would get. And I'm incredibly fortunate for that. And I remember I was speaking to my dad when our CEO was coming on. I said, I really want to be COO of NAC. And Dad said, oh, Diandra. And I love my dad, and he's my biggest fan. He goes, you got to work 10 years to get there. And I said, I don't think I do. And I kind of just went. I remember one of the first days I met my boss, I said, hi, I'm Diandra, and I want to be CEO of NAC. And he went, all right, let's do this. And I ended up starting to move up in the company. But, I have that kind of attitude where I kind of forge that path forward for myself. And, that's definitely my style. But the other thing I wanted to touch on was going back to one of the first questions of not having as much on the East Coast, but forging our own way and creating our own networks. And I'm very fortunate to look up to a lot of amazing women that are doing great things across Canada. And a lot of my inspiration comes from my cooking. And I remember one of the first dinners, infused dinners that I did, was for a group of 15 women. And everyone showed up with their kimonos on, and I was having the best time cooking for these ladies. And sitting back, being able to give them kind of an experience that they're all cannabis enthusiasts, but they'd never really had that kind of experience before. And we shaped the conversation, and we had a very guided discussion. And to have everyone kind of stepping back and watching them go through that experience and the conversation that started, that's where I get my fuel and my drive from, is watching my friends, my acquaintances that are women that are powerful in their own right, that use cannabis but don't really talk about it, but in that environment feel so comfortable. So it's really interesting to have that side of my life, this underground kind of infused dining thing that I'm doing, but as well the corporate side of cannabis. And soon watching them merge together is going to be very, very interesting.
I'm definitely looking forward to one of those infused meals. But I agree, that's like part of the most exciting and rewarding part of being in this industry, is facilitating that connection for somebody who's curious about cannabis to have that good experience with cannabis and help them experience it in the same way that we understand it, and take that stigma away from the conversation. So that's what I'm really passionate about. So yeah, coming back to you, Hilary, I'm so fascinated with this growing side of cannabis and how we can make sure that this compassionate side to cannabis, and where the patients and the education comes first. I would love to hear some more about where that's going on the larger scale of things.
Well, I think there's a correlation between compassion and social responsibility. Like in the corporate world, we call it corporate social responsibility, doing things for the right reasons. So as the country is getting crazy about the legalization of recreational cannabis, where are all the conversations about the patients? Do we still have patients top of mind? Our patients are still our just priority? Or did we just fight for their rights so that we could get access to cannabis for recreational purposes? And like on a bigger picture, strategic scale for the country, that's what I'm thinking about. And so inside Canopy Growth, a part of my job is I work on figuring out what we're investing in terms of corporate social responsibility. And I get to make sure that the big chunks of money that we give away go to people who have been working in the trenches on important issues for a long time, and not just to Johnny-come-latelys to the industry who are looking to find their piece of the pie now. We've done some amazing initiatives with driving and youth, like starting to get ahead of some of the big complex issues the country's facing. But the one that I'm most excited about is we just gave a really big grant to the Canadian AIDS Society. And the Canadian AIDS Society was the first patient organization to publicly start talking about cannabis and to be advocating and to writing reports about it. Lynn Belle-Isle is another female pioneer in this space. And we are funding the Canadian AIDS Society to create clinical guidelines for the use of cannabis, which is really hard and complex to do. It's one of the things that physicians want, and it's one of the places where it's so hard to jam this complex, dynamic plant into the pigeonhole of how we use pharmaceutical medicines. And the Canadian AIDS Society has pulled together a team of leading expert physicians from across the country, and it's going to take 2 years. And that project is going to create a tool that's going to open doors for patients and physicians, because there are so many barriers to access that we have to keep breaking down. It started out as a girl with a pager and a backpack full of weed and a bicycle, and that same theme now is having to work. For me, I got to work inside the industry. I need a seat at the table, and I have one. I won't dance around it. The board level of Canopy Growth and most of the high-level executive is male, and I hope to see that that's something that we keep changing. But not all of it, but a lot of the department heads are women. More and more women are elevating themselves into positions of power and influence inside that company. I work with mostly amazing women. I feel like I still have my cannabis crew wolf pack, it's just, our clothes have just gotten better over the last
The tribe. So we are a panel of women, so I'm just going to bring it up because cannabis and sex just go together so well. So I'm just going to throw it out there to the panel. How does cannabis play a role in your sexuality?
It helps me love myself so much. I was consciously celibate for a year, and if I hadn't have had cannabis that year with me as closely as I did in bed with me every night, I wouldn't have learned to love myself in a way that the person that I spend my life with should love me. Beyond sexuality, I mean, it's amazing lube, it's super fun, and give me love potion, and yeah, we're gonna go all night. But for me, it was about my personal sexuality, about really being comfortable in my own skin, smoking a joint and dancing naked in the mirror, and doing yoga naked and loving every inch of my body, and rubbing cannabis oil on it and feeling amazing in every way that this plant touched my life. For me, that's how cannabis and sex collide.
You know what, like, absolutely. I mean, going back to Annie's point, like, so much about sexual pleasure is all in your head, right? And what cannabis allows us to do is to get out of our head. You know, it allows us to stop thinking our negative thoughts, or it allows us to forget about the crappy day we had at work, and to kind of make yourself a bit more conscious and a bit more aware of kind of what's, well, for me, it helps me to bring out the best of myself. And I'm sorry, if I'm bringing the best of myself into the bedroom, you can bet I'm having a damn good time.
I've been single now for the first time in like a decade, and so two things happened. Thank you. It was a hard transition, and the amount of bottles of my own personal made Foria style lube that I've gone through in the past year has been, I have a big old recycle bag full of them. But that was definitely one side for me, because being alone for that first time and really slowing down enough to connect with yourself and figure yourself out a little bit, cannabis by far has helped me do that, not only sexually, but just freeing my mind a little so that I can reflect on the things that are important to me. And I went from, I've been using cannabis since I was 14, but I was using it very heavily and in a way that wasn't conducive or productive in my life. It was an addiction, and it was an escape for me because I wasn't dealing with a lot of stuff. So over the last year, I've learned to use cannabis much differently so that it adds to my life as opposed to detracts from it. And it's been quite a journey, and cannabis has been by my side, even starting to grow for myself and for patients. And it all happened at the same time. So over the last 8 months, I've been growing as well. And having that time with my plants and being able to nurture myself and nurture them and create something beautiful for others has been an amazing transformational experience. So yeah, after a year or 2 years of a lot of this, it's kind of, we're here now, and it feels good.
Here's to getting high and dancing naked in the mirror.
Yes,
I'm totally with
love
you.
Oh my God, it's my favorite way to start the day.
Stoned naked dance parties. Yep. So if it wasn't for cannabis, I don't think I would ever get laid. I'm like super type A personality, like hardcore, like busy brain all the time. And it definitely interferes with my sex life, for sure. Like there's always like a list running next to the bed. There's always like responsibilities that are sliding off the side of the table that I'm thinking about at 2:00 in the morning or when I'm on a date. And this year has also, like, aside from my pretty epic work life, doing the government relations for the Compassion Club while I do my pretty grown-up job for Canopy Growth, There's also been a tremendous amount of grief in my life this year. In my personal life, I've been kind of like a grief walker with like really intense things happening with my very closest girlfriends. Like one of them who actually was on stage last year with me on a panel about cannabis and cancer. Did any of you see that? The panel with Katia with cannabis and cancer? She was amazing. She's doing really well, by the way. But so one of my besties has really far progressed stage 4 cancer, and I'm kind of her, other than her husband, I'm one of her closest people, and that's an intense journey. My other best friend's 18-year-old daughter died of a fentanyl overdose a few months ago. Actually, it was like 6 months ago, because I couldn't go to Lift last year because of that. Just like boom, 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 boom. Like, pardon my language, but sometimes it's just like, fuck adulting. And with like all of that super hardcore caregiving and like really big intense things happening on top of my already pretty big intense life, sex is like so far off the radar when you're in grief mode, or also when you're just like perpetually burnt out. And alcohol doesn't do it. Like a glass or two of wine, maybe I'll feel like having a makeout, but then it's kind of like, meh, it kind of peters off. But some like really good sativa, and just like keep your pen next to the bed, and if the like brain starts getting busy or the like grief stuff starts coming up, just like have another little puff. And I don't feel like it suppresses those feelings, it just lets me slide into the part of my being where my sexuality and sensuality lives, and I don't know where I would be without her.
It's like where you go to like love and connect with yourself and heal, its own type of therapy. So I want to talk a little bit about the correlation between the femininity of the plant that is so revered. The plant that we love is the female plant. And do you feel if there is a correlation between that and how so many of us women feel so drawn into this industry? You know, I feel called and so passionate to do what I am doing. There is no other choice in my life. And I wonder sometimes about that, about the female plant, and I just wonder if you feel the same way about that.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And just kind of what I said in my last answer was just being around those plants and allowing, healing by taking care of myself and something else. As beautiful as this plant, I mean, it's a given for me. It's been huge.
I pushed cannabis out of my public life for a long time. I didn't publicly talk about cannabis until May. I actually crowdfunded my way to the last Lift Expo. I was like, hey, PEI, I want to go to Lift. And they were like, oh, okay, here are a couple dollars. And I got to Lift on the backs of my community, which was incredible. But cannabis was like a secret. She was like a dirty little secret that I had for a long time, and almost took pride in myself that people didn't know that I was a stoner. They didn't know that I smoked weed just by looking at me. But then I decided that I don't, like, that's not, who cares? You can look any way you want and smoke cannabis. I would love to be like a glamorous stoner lady. Like, that's kind of my look. It's totally what I'm going for.
You are a glamorous stoner lady.
Thank you.
Hell yeah, girl.
Thank you. But yeah, like, I don't have to wear Rastafarian colors to identify as someone that loves her, that loves Mary Jane. And I pushed it away for so long, and she just kept like calling me, and I was like, girl, okay, I'll go out with you and I'll scream from the rooftop that I love you. And now I am, and I feel like my life is complete, and I'm like moving in the right direction for the first time. Like, it's like everything is just aligning because I finally had the courage to say, fuck it, I love cannabis.
It's like the most authentic version of you has finally come out.
Amen.
What about you, Hilary? I know we've talked about this a bit.
Well, I mean, she kind of owns me. Like, she claimed my life, and I gave it to her. Like, I raised a organization and a movement instead of choosing to have children. And I have been told that I'm really hard to date because, like, she's always kind of number one. And I mean, and that relates to like the patients that I'm working with, and there was just a thought that I wanted to tell you. You know, I have this thought that's like this, it's not super clear, but it's this connection between like the women's rights movements and the freeing of the cannabis plant. And, you know, like I see these kind of like these parallels, like, you know, women got the vote and women are like getting into positions of power and like more and more there's balance, but we're not quite there yet. And I think that the Me Too movement really was a good eye-opener for us about how we're not quite done our work around like balancing power between the genders. And I feel like with cannabis, I have fought for her for so long to free her from the chains of criminalization, and we're getting there. But you know what? To me, this is not freedom. Like, I work in the biggest publicly traded cannabis company. I'm invested in cannabis stocks. Like, I'm not coming from a like super pure altruistic place, but I also see that commercialization and commodification of her. She's still chained. And I don't think our work is done. Like, this is like legalization 1.0, and we have to keep evolving the legislation and evolving the industry to a place where she really is like free, you know? And when we were a movement of people risking everything, sometimes losing everything, there were a lot of women on the front lines. And when we became an industry, and there is a lot more, you know, like conversation about investment, and then we see like a lot more men on the front lines. And I think that's really interesting too. So we're not there yet.
We're getting there, and I think a big part of that is the conversations and the education, and bringing together the experiences and the knowledge that people have, and combining that with the research that's coming out as well. So, flower and freedom. What I wanted to wrap up before we do some Q&A. So if you have some questions, please think them through. We're going to get to Q&A in just a moment. But just to wrap things up, how does our audience get in touch with you? Social media, or what's the best way to follow the work that you're doing?
Professionally, you can follow me on Twitter, Miss Cannabis. I'm talking and I'm like retweeting David Brown like all the time is pretty much what it is. But if you want to see how I connect with cannabis on a more personal way, follow me on Instagram _Cannibis, CANNIEBIS. And you're going to get real personal with me if you follow me there. So you've been warned.
I follow Annie on Instagram, and I really enjoy experiencing her journey through cannabis through social media.
I don't hide anything.
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess I'm on Twitter. I'm Hi Heidi Hi, but truthfully, I really want to talk to people who are passionate about exactly making this cannabis plant free. I'm interested in talking to people who are passionate about cannabis law reform. So get a hold of me through NORML.ca, NORML.ca. I'd love to hear from you.
You guys can find me on Instagram, Diandra Phipps, at Diandra Phipps, or on my website, diandraphipps.ca, and there's lots of recipes and fun stuff happening over there.
I suck at being consistent with social media. It's totally not a good place to try to follow me. I'm like really hot and cold with social media. If you want to be in touch with me, I will go get a stack of business cards. And really, the best thing is through email. A lot of the work that I'm doing now, I'm not that public about it anymore. You know, like I'm doing a lot of government consulting and trying to help them shape things. And I just don't talk about everything that I do all the time on social media anymore. But for people that have like specific inquiries, I would be really happy to be in touch, and I will go get a stack of business cards, old school style.
Amazing. Thank you, ladies. And we can go to a question in the audience if there are any questions. I think we have one right here. Yep.
Just a quick question. I just wanted to get your predictions as far as when you think legalization may come about. I mean, they say July. It's very confusing in terms of like the drawbacks on that statement and the worry from other parties who are saying, oh, we're not ready yet. But I'm not too sure if they're necessarily aware of the cannabis plan, all that entails, and they're just worried about all the fear and propaganda that's being placed in their heads as far as all the dangers and the scares that might happen once it becomes legalized. So just your predictions on that time.
I've got a women's cannabis and wellness retreat happening in Prince Edward Island, July 13th to 15th. So it better be legalized by then. If you want more information, follow me.
So to speak to your comment about the fear and propaganda, the folks responsible for legalizing cannabis in the country have had a hell of a job of doing it in an environment where much of the country still it has a prohibitionist mentality. And it's been really difficult for them to thread the needle and try to find the right balance between freedom and control. And so my understanding, depending on what happens with the bill that's in the Senate right now, but that it is on track for us to have legalization at the federal level in July. And then how long it takes each province to institute what their frameworks are going to be is hard to say. Different municipalities are pushing back. You may end up with some provinces or some municipalities that are banning cannabis businesses in their zone. The country is not going to look like the same in every jurisdiction. But the federal government and the provincial governments are moving a million miles an hour like a locomotive, working to get their systems in place and their policies in place and doing all of their consulting. We're not going to have legal extracts right away in July. I've been consulting with them a little bit on starting to get their heads wrapped around how to regulate extracts, and I think it's going to be another year.
Do we have another question? There we have Kaylee there.
Hello. I was really inspired by what you were speaking to on the freedom for the cannabis plant. And I would like to know from each of you, if we're only halfway there, if it's only legalization 1.0, what does freedom for the cannabis plant look like to each of you?
I'll jump in for just a moment. And so for me, freedom of the cannabis plant, really a big part of this where I pour my time and my passion is freedom of the knowledge and the conversation. So I still feel like there is so much held back in the mainstream and the general public about the way that cannabis is talked about and perceived and the stereotypes that still endure today. And so for me, freedom of the cannabis plant is the freedom of conversation in everyday life and the things that we should have been taught in school, we know about today. And not just us here at this Cannabis Expo, because we're all quite clearly passionate about it, but the people that we talk to in our daily lives, that they have access and the ability to this type of information. I mean, that's where I've poured my time in the industry with Flower and Freedom. And I know that you ladies have your own passions within the industry as well.
So it's a great question, and it's a complex answer. Like, I feel like we could sit down and chat and like talk about it, like that, the answer to that for hours. But the thing that's top of mind for me is I want to see insurance coverage for patients. That right now, cannabis is not covered as a medicine, and many people still use their opiates and their other meds because they can't afford them. And cannabis, we need to get it to the place within its approval status and whatever the hell else we need to do so that it has insurance coverage. And that would be the most important thing for me around one of the places where there's still more work to do.
Yeah.
That was a good one, and I don't know how I'm going to follow that up. For me, it's barrier of access. I think the stigma in general, physicians, general public, as well as my family even still has about this plant. I mean, a lot of my family, they don't really understand what I do. They still think I work at a dispensary and this, and just that stigma and me having to explain myself over and over and over again about how it's not that bad if I were to work at a dispensary. Let's have that conversation. But I think, when I was over Christmas, our crop came down, worst timing ever, and to sit there with my dad, this is 2.0 for me, it was surreal, and watching him trim with me, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I never thought we would be talking about cannabis around the dinner table at Christmas time. So, I mean, we could sit down and talk for hours about this, and it's hard to follow insurance because that is something that a lot of our patients struggle with. They turn back to opiates and other forms of medication that are covered because they cannot afford this. And to think that medical cannabis is going to be taxed, it's just, it's all wrong, and it's going to be a cluster, you know what, for the next year to 2 years. So we've only just begun really to have these conversations, and it's people, people that I'm sitting here with that are really going to make a difference, and people that are at these events that are really going to make a difference and be the voice for those that need it most.
To me, I didn't really feel that my cannabis use was free until I was able to come out of the cannabis closet and say, hey, you know what? I am a cannabis consumer. I smoke weed. I have a joint when I wake up. I have a joint when I go to bed. When I am serving patients, I am typically medicated. I might do a bong hit when I get home and feel really stoned. And you know what? I like it. I really do. So to me, freedom in cannabis is really just the freedom to say, hey, I'm a cannabis consumer. I'm not ashamed about it. And one day it'll become normalized, and hopefully it will get that way, where people don't have to feel ashamed about using cannabis as a medicine, as a recreational product, something that we grow. So that's what cannabis freedom is to me. Yeah.
God, I'm gonna keep it short, hopefully. We should all be allowed to grow however many plants we want to grow. That's freedom. I also would love to see cannabis on the shelves of like CBD. When we see CBD skincare at Loblaws, that's cannabis freedom. When we see we see hemp hearts now and stuff, but like when we see oils and like the holistic health centers, like Hilary has started with the BC Compassion Society. When I see that in Prince Edward Island, when I see holistic healthcare that incorporates cannabis, to me, that's cannabis freedom.
Do we have any other questions out there? We have one over here.
Thank you for sharing your stories. I'm very inspired and starry-eyed. So I was just kind of wondering what kind of advice you had for young women like myself who want to get into the cannabis industry or the activism and don't really know where to start.
Just do it. Really, my province wasn't holding any kind of public discussion about the upcoming legalization. And I was like, really? Like, no one's gonna talk about this? Okay, I guess I will step in and do it. You can't be invited. No one's gonna invite you. I invite you. I'm gonna ask you to go home and start a Twitter account and start retweeting everything you can, start reading everything you can, educate yourself, because education is freedom. It truly is. Find out as much as you can about this plant and then shout it from the rooftops. You can do it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, to be an expert, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and also be a part of the I'm like part of the safety committee around cannabis, right? Like, I'm worried about when we get to legalization, people overdoing it with edibles, or people who haven't used cannabis in a long time, smoking half a really strong Kush joint after drinking a half a bottle of wine and greening out and feeling shitty. So really educate yourself on how to use cannabis safely and how to make it really fun, and join the safety committee with me. But really, there's so much misinformation out there, so be an expert. And also, you can start with small things. Like, one of my amazing work wives, Elizabeth, I don't know if she's out here, but man, that girl is incredible. The woman is incredible, and so has my back. She does so many cool things, and she was just casually mentioning to me last night that in her little town in Ontario, she's starting to host basically like a Stitch and Bitch, but she's teaching women how to make rosin. Right? She's having come on over, let's have tea, let's all hang out and bring your hair straightener and your buds, and we're going to chat, and I'm going to teach you how to make rosin, right? So it can be doing education and sharing information in the age-old way that women have been doing it too. And be careful, because she might come for you and claim your life too. Yeah.
And I think that's, it's interesting you say that, because with all of the opportunity right now in And I think it's natural as women, we just want to fill all the gaps, you know? Like, I can do that, I can multitask, I can, take care of the kids and all of it. But I've really started to try to hone in a little bit on what I love and my passion. Try a little bit of everything. A girl asked me over here, she said, how did you get into cooking? I just did. I started at my friend's restaurant. She taught me how to cook, and I came back, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I had the determination and drive and the passion for it, and I wanted to make a difference. So just put that foot forward, and you'll just keep going.
You know what? I'm so happy to hear that you've been inspired by the women on the stage, because truthfully, they inspired me to get into this cannabis industry. And when I was inspired by them, I literally reached out to them. And how, people in this industry, I mean, there are quite a few new players, but there are also people who have decades of experience in the cannabis industry. And regardless of whether they've been in the industry for quite some time or whether they're brand new, everyone's really approachable, right? So, I mean, reach out to us on Twitter, on Instagram, by email once Hilary has her business cards. Ask us all the questions, and really kind of, as Hilary mentioned, I mean, that's how women kind of share their information, right? Like through sharing stories with one another, reaching out, kind of finding your space in this industry, because there's so much to do. And I think women are really taking the charge, because women just have this uncanny ability to persevere through all the shit that goes on and to just roll up their sleeves and get stuff done. And that's exactly what's happening now. So please reach out to us, really.
You have something to add, Hilary?
Yeah, volunteer. Find an organization that's doing good work for patients. Depending on where, come and get a business card from me. We can talk about it. But depending on where you live in the country too, I can suggest an organization. There's CFAM, Canadians for Fair Access to Medical Marijuana. Yeah. They do a lot of their work online and are really good at using volunteers. And then you'll find somebody that you want to work with, who you want to learn from, who wants to teach you.
Yeah, for me it was focusing on my strengths and where I was passionate to be in this industry, because there's clearly so many different things you can do in this industry. So happy to chat some more. So that's going to wrap it up. That was a great question. Oh, we got time for squeeze in one question and one answer.
1 minute and 18 seconds.
That was the worst noise I've heard.
Wow. Hi.
Came in with a bang.
Scared my poor nephew, but it's all good. Thank you so much, ladies. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm a physician who authorizes medical cannabis. And as a female physician in this space, what I'm intrigued by is that we are so removed from each other in conversation. And that's what I've been trying to bridge within my own practice in Ontario and in Alberta, where as a physician who wants to empower women and work with women, I'm very much removed from the industry because I've been put into the gatekeeper role of, until you get the medical authorization, you don't get to talk to me, or there is no conversation to be had. Whereas as a feminist, as someone who's looking for women to be united, to be self-empowered, I mean, this is 2018, Oprah said it's new days, new beginnings. And I'm enjoying the conversation. I would love to be part of the conversation instead of just being a bystander, because what you're expressing are what my patients are expressing. And I've been dealing with that from my medical perspective, but as a woman, I've been also addressing it. The range of, my husband isn't sure that this is a good idea for our family, or what am I going to say to my kids? I tell them that drugs are bad for you. And here I am, mom's taking her cannabis in the bathroom. And these are real life problems that women are facing. And I love how the industry is addressing it. I mean, there's some amazing vendors who are creating accessibility. The challenge is that women don't know who to talk to in general from a professional level of being able to ask those questions. So the question I ask back to you is, what can I do as a physician to help interact better with the industry so that I am asked for?
Meet us at the side of the stage, because I think all of us want to talk to you.
Yeah, we're out of time, and it's a huge question, but it starts with a conversation that I want to have with you, that you want to have with me, and we'll start with booking a phone date.
Be happy to talk to you. All of us can help put you in touch and your patients in touch with the people that they need to get the answers that they're looking for. Definitely.
Thank you, everybody, so much for joining the Her Roots panel, and thank you so much to our panelists. You're welcome. And have a wonderful day.